How many buses are in operation in Gaza? What happened to the buses in Gaza? Is this a false flag operation? It sure might be, and we'll get to that in a second. But before we even get to that, before we even start to refute this, let's think about the underlying subtext and the fact that this immediately became international news and why no one's asking the question, what happened to all the buses in Gaza? If this was a terror attack, then that means that Hamas violated the ceasefire. How many times has Israel violated the ceasefire? Do you know? It's 350. How come international media hasn't reported on the 350 Israeli violations of the ceasefire? None of those made front page headline news. Oh, and Israel's violations killed 92 people and injured 822 others. Whereas these buses were empty. But Western media is so racist that 3 empty buses in Tel Aviv matter more than 92 Palestinian lives, or 822 Palestinians maimed and injured. Israeli buses are more human than Palestinians in the Western imagination. Netanyahu was so outraged by these empty buses exploding that he ordered a West Bank military operation. And Western media quickly ran cover justifying that invasion, that illegal expansion of an illegal occupation, while clearly obscuring in the headlines the fact that the buses were empty. I mean, you really have to read down into these articles to figure out that the buses were empty. And repeating the Israeli assumption that these were suspected terror attacks without even raising the question of, what if it's a false flag? Which, if you know Israeli history, is a question you should ask. Because since its foundation, Israel has used false flag attacks to manipulate its own people. I'll read you a little from my book. In 1950, so this is 2 years after the establishment of Israel, I'm quoting Eli Shohad, a historian here. Most Arab Jews were not Zionists and remained reluctant to emigrate, unquote. Shohad explains how the Iraqi government, under pressure from international Zionists, worked together with Israeli Zionists to inspire Jews to leave the country. But when luring the Jews of Baghdad to Israel with financial incentives failed, quote, a Jewish underground cell commanded by secret agents sent from Israel planted bombs in Jewish centers so as to create hysteria among Iraqi Jews and thus catalyze a mass exodus to Israel. To this day, Zionists and the Israeli government deny that Israel had anything to do with the bombings. But in his 2023 book, 3 Worlds, Memoirs of an Arab Jew, Avi Schleim, whose family fled Baghdad in the wake of the bombings, concluded after extensive research that at least 3 of the bombings were carried out by Israeli agents. And after the bombings, 110,000 Iraqi Jews immigrated to Israel. In 1954, there was the Lavon affair, in which Israeli military agents recruited Egyptian Jews to plant bombs inside Egyptian, American, and British-owned civilian targets in order to get the Britons to retain their military presence in the Suez Canal zone. In 2012, Israeli Mossad agents were caught out posing as CIA agents in order to recruit Jundullah members to fight their covert war against Iran. So at a time when the Israeli government is looking to manufacture consent to continue their forever war on Palestinians among a populace that has gotten very sick of the war and in fact is facing mass defections and a recruiting crisis for its military, and then all of a sudden 3 conveniently empty buses explode at the same time in Tel Aviv, it's worth asking, did Israelis do this? And it could be the official Israeli Mossad did this to try to drum up support for their war. It could be just lone far-right radical elements wanting to force the government into a position to expand the war on the West Bank, which Netanyahu immediately used this as a pretext to do. I don't know who did it. But something I've learned from Mohammed El-Kurd's Perfect Victims and the Politics of Appeal is to spot the fact that this is a trap. Even if it wasn't a false flag, the Western media reporting on it is a trap. While absolutely we should raise the question, could this be a false flag? Was this maybe not a terror attack from Palestinians? We need to do so while exposing, not feeding into, the underlying racist subtext of this story, which is that empty buses in Tel Aviv matter more than Palestinian lives. That we should be more concerned about those bus blasts than the 350 Israeli violations of the ceasefire, which killed and maimed people. There's a line in here I want to get tattooed on my arm so I never forget it, and it's spit out the bait and spit at the accusation. Who blew up the bombs in Tel Aviv? We may not know for weeks or months or years or ever, but you know what? I don't fucking care, because no one was in those buses. But we know exactly who's blown up Gaza. Not just the buses, but the apartment buildings and the schools and the hospitals and the refugee camps and everything, and the streets and the mosques and the universities. It was Israel. Israel is the greatest terrorist entity in the Middle East. So who gives a fuck about your empty fucking buses? Here's the part of the video where I usually remind you to pre-order my But Perfect Victims debuted at number 9 this week on the New York Times bestseller list for paperback fiction, which is awesome. But how cool would it be if it got to number 1? If you follow me, if you love my content, if you've pre-ordered my book, I guarantee you're also going to love this book. I learned so much from it. It is going to hone my activism and hone my powers of thinking and using rhetoric. So today I'm urging you to order Perfect Victims. Muhammad Al-Kurd is one of the most brilliant poets of our generation, and he's also clearly one of the most brilliant thinkers about rhetoric and philosophy and activism. If you purchase directly from Haymarket Books, the way publishing works, that means that Muhammad and Haymarket will both get the biggest cut, and that way Haymarket will be able to continue putting out a lot of pro-Palestinian and leftist titles. When you're done with that, if you have some extra cash and you haven't already, of course, I do encourage you to pre-order Genocide Bad, my book coming out in April with Interlink Press. You'll find all those links in my bio.